Well, I think we've got the majority of people, participants with us. Let me say good morning again, or good afternoon for some of you in different time zones. Delighted to welcome you to this third webinar of the 2020-21 EPRC webinar series. My name is Tom Broekel, and I'm one of the directors of the European Policies Research Centre at Strathclyde University in Glasgow. Of course, in normal circumstances, we would be meeting at EPRC, the University of Strathclyde, and of course, we look forward to being able to do so again at some point in the future next year. But as we found with other virtual events, this medium does provide the opportunity for more people to join us, and delighted to be welcoming participants from a number of different countries to take part. And we hope that you find the webinar interesting and enjoyable, perhaps also a distraction from events in the United States that are going on at the moment. Well, I'm delighted to be welcoming Professor Rune Fitjar today, speaking on the subject of searching through the haystack, the relatedness and complexity of prioritized industries. Before introducing our speaker, I just want to inform you that the meeting is being recorded, which means that you and others will have the opportunity to follow the meeting at a later stage. And the recording will be made available on the EPRC YouTube channel and shared with you by email. And please do use Twitter to share your thoughts on the webinar. I'm sure that you're familiar with the protocol for Zoom meetings, so I don't need to go into those in detail. Just a reminder to keep your microphone on mute if you're not speaking. And please feel free to use the blue hand function if you'd like to ask a question, but also feel free to use the chat function, perhaps to make a comment in the course of the webinar, or again to ask questions. So let me then go on to present our speaker today. Rune Fitjar is a professor in Innovation Studies at the UIS Business School Centre for Innovation Research, and currently the Pro-Rector for Innovation and Society at the University of Stavanger in Norway. He has a PhD in government from the London School of Economics and works at the intersection of regional studies, innovation studies, economic geography, and political science. And he also coordinates the EU Horizon 2020 Innovative Training Network on the role of universities in innovation and regional development, known as Rune. Thank you, Rune, again for joining us, and you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will try to share my presentation with you. Let's see if we can also get it full screen. Seems to be a bit slow. Okay, so if it's not going full screen, then please bear with me with going in the presenter view. So really delighted to be back in Strathclyde, where I gave actually one of my first seminars, I think, after starting work on regional innovation back some 10, 11 years ago, and also hopefully to take your mind a little bit off things going on somewhere else in the world this morning to talk about more mundane European policy issues. So this is a paper that I'm doing with Jason Deegan, who's a PhD candidate, and Tom Broekel, who's also a professor here at the University of Stavanger. And it's basically about how regions prioritize industries in their smart specialization strategies. So we call it searching through the haystack of related and complex industries. So basically, the research on smart specialization has offered relatively clear guidance as to what regions should prioritize in their smart specialization strategies. Looking at a lot of the literature in evolutionary economic geography and regional studies, it's turning into a pretty uniform policy recommendation, saying that regions need to prioritize industries that are related to what they currently do, and to industries which are more complex than what they do now. I'll come a little bit back to the argument for that in a moment. But what I want to focus on in this study is that we need to look at also at what regions actually do prioritize. So not many people have done this. We have mainly research on kind of creating normative recommendations for the smart specialization policy based on research, but we have very little evidence on how regions are actually behaving when they are creating their smart specialization strategies, whether they are actually then heeding this advice and prioritizing the industries that they are recommended to do by the literature on this. So what we want to ask is whether regions actually do prioritize industries which are related to their current specializations, and to what extent they also prioritize industries that are complex, and finally whether they do both, so whether they prioritize industries that are both related and complex. So my computer is a bit freezing up. I wonder whether maybe Liliana should try to share this instead. I can stop my share and
I can try to do that.
Yes.
Let me see.
Sorry about that. It's actually freezing on my own screen as well.
Okay. Just 1 second. Apologies. Can you all see?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we can go to the next slide then, please. So smart specialization, I guess most of you are well familiar with the literature on smart specialization, but basically the idea is that it's a place-based approach to economic development, and the idea is that regions need to prioritize some areas for intervention, and that prioritization should be based on an analysis of their own strengths and potentials. So essentially what we have is that regions in smart specialization, they should prioritize something, and they should really prioritize something where they have a unique capacity to succeed. And the ambitions for this are threefold. So one is that we need really to move away from this one-size-fits-all policy approach, where all regions are going for the same industries. Let's say all regions want to be Silicon Valleys, or all regions want to target bioeconomy or nanotech or whatever technology that is currently in vogue, but rather go for a policy that is really suited to their own unique capacities and competencies and situations. And then secondly, to avoid regions basically targeting the same industries, and then finally to avoid duplication across regions. So the idea is, both from the region's perspective, this increases the chances that they will succeed, but also from the European or national perspective, it avoids all regions going after the same pot of gold, but rather you spread out across various industries. We can go to the next one. So this is, of course, being implemented in the EU in a big way. For a long time now, EU funding has been conditional on regions having a smart specialization strategy. But once we've moved over into this implementation, we see some problems as well. So first of all, many regions find it difficult to build their smart specialization strategies. There is not really a very clear evidence base on which they can build their strategies. So regions really have to make up their own evidence for this. Many people don't really understand what smart specialization is. So basically the word smart specialization in there, or the word specialization rather, is something that leads policymakers to believe that it's about specializing, and then it's some kind of cluster policy that they should specialize in what they already do. But really smart specialization is about diversification and going into new areas. So this is kind of lost in translation a little bit. We conceptualize smart specialization here as mainly a place-based policy that is a policy for diversifying into new areas. So that is kind of our core definition and what we want to look at. Next one, please. And then the question is, how do regions actually do this? So how do regions normally diversify into new industries? And if you look at the literature in evolutionary economic geography, there is pretty clear evidence on this. Basically, the idea is that related diversification is really the dominant process, the dominant way by which regions diversify into new areas. So essentially, relatedness to its current activity is one of the key drivers of this process. Regions are much more likely to enter into new activities, whether that is patterns, industries, occupations, technologies, products. They're much more likely to enter into activities that are related to the activities that they currently do. So the idea and the really dominant recommendation from this literature is that regions need to identify those economic domains which are related to what they currently do, and then prioritize diversification into those domains. Next one, please. And based on that, the current framework has been proposed for smart specialization, where regions need to identify, first of all, the relatedness of different industries. So how similar is the knowledge, inputs, skills of that industry to what regions currently do? And that translates into some kind of risk assessment of a policy. So if you enter into industries that are very related to what you do, then the risk is lower. Whereas if you try to diversify into industries which are unrelated to what you do, then there's a high risk that you won't succeed with that. This framework also has another dimension, which is the complexity dimension. So relatedness is just basically an indicator of how easy it is for a region to diversify into a specific activity, but it doesn't really say whether that's a desirable activity to go into or not. So this is why there is an interest in the role of complexity in this. Economic development is about upgrading, and it's a process where regions tend to go into more and more complex industries over time. So we can guess that industries that are more complex are also more desirable in general for regions to go into. So what regions basically on the basis of this want to do is going into regions which are highly complex and highly related to their current activities. That would mean that the risks are low and the benefits are high. And of course, there is also some kind of interaction here. If you want to go into a simple industry, then you might not really need to be related. Whereas if you want to go into an industry that is really difficult to develop, then you really need to have related competencies in order to manage to do that. So what regions want is basically to be in the top right corner here in a situation where the industries that they prioritize are both complex and related to their current activities. Next one, please. So on the basis of this, we formulate three hypotheses. First of all, that the relatedness of an economic activity to what the region currently does increases the probability that regions will choose that activity as a priority in their smart specialization policy. Secondly, that the complexity of an activity also increases the probability that it's chosen. And then finally, that there is an interaction between these two, that relatedness is more important when you are trying to diversify into complex activities than if you are diversifying into simple ones. Next one, please. And then finally, in this theory review, of course, this is kind of looking into whether regions do behave in the way that they are recommended to by a lot of this literature. But of course, policies are not really the outcomes of technocratic processes. They are fundamentally the outcomes of political processes where there are a bunch of other influences. So it's not just whether regions do or do not do what the literature and research recommends them to do, but it is how they balance a bunch of different priorities in doing this. So we identify at least 3 different influences that might also shape the smart specialization policies of regions. So, I mean, first of all, there are differences between regions in their size, in their economic development level, in their innovation systems, and that will influence how many priorities they can really manage. So a big region can manage maybe to diversify into a lot of different areas at once, whereas a small region can probably only diversify into one area. So that is bound to have an impact on how regions actually are able to use this insight. Secondly, incumbent industries, we know, will often have some political sway in a region. So they have both direct lines to policymakers. They have also a lot of employees who are also voters. So often what you see is that when regions try to prioritize industries, they don't really prioritize new industries, but they prioritize industries that are already there, that already have somebody speaking for them. So we believe that this is something that can confuse the smart specialization strategy when it comes to its ability to promote diversification. And then finally, we know that policies diffuse across regions as governments tend to learn from their neighbors. So this idea of policy mobility. And this is, again, something that's not really in line with the ideals of smart specialization, because smart specialization wants regions to spread out over different priorities, but we do believe that that regions will tend to prioritize things that others around them also prioritize. Next one, please. Yeah, we can move on, I think, to the model. So basically, in order to address this, we try to measure all of these things. And we try to fit this in our regression model. So we have data for 106 regions at the NUTS2 level. Those are, of course, not all the regions in the EU. There are more than 200 of those, but those are all the regions where we have basically data for what they prioritize in their smart specialization strategies. And the data for that is from the JRC in Seville, where they have actually coded the smart specialization strategies of all regions into different industries. We look at 66 industries, and basically our outcome is whether that industry in that region is prioritized or not. So basically the units in this analysis are the 106 regions times 66 industries. And the outcome is basically, is it prioritized or not? And then we try to explain that as a function of how related is that industry to other industries in the same region. And then secondly, how complex is that industry, where we use a measure of occupational skill complexity. So basically it says that industries which are complex are those which have occupations that perform complex tasks in them. Then we control for various other influences, which are basically the ones that I put up on my last slide in the theory section. So first of all, the development level of the region, which encompasses the development of the innovation system, the size of the regional economy. Secondly, the size of the industry itself, which is meant to capture its political weight in the region. So basically, whether it's an incumbent region, an incumbent industry or not. And then finally, external influences, which is the policy mobility side of it. So what do neighboring regions prioritize? In the second model, we also add an interaction term between relatedness and complexity in order to test whether regions tend to emphasize or prioritize industries that are both related and complex. Next one, please. So this is just looking at the number of priorities that different regions select. As you can see, this varies really a lot, and some regions are really bad at prioritizing. So we had, as I said, 66 different industries that they could prioritize in, and some regions actually prioritize 40 of those, which is, I suppose, akin to not really prioritizing anything, whereas other regions prioritize 3. So this is really something that varies a lot across regions. This is important for our empirical analysis because we model this as a binary outcome. So regions independently select whether to prioritize one industry or not. It's not that they select among different industries which to prioritize. But as we can see here, because there is so much variation across regions in how many they prioritize, it's really not that if you prioritize something, you cannot prioritize something else. It is basically that you look at every industry and say, is it prioritized or is it not prioritized? This is also not really a function of the size of the region. So these are ordered by size. And there is a slight downward slope on the number of priorities, but there are still really, really big regions that prioritize only a few industries and very small regions that prioritize almost 25 industries. So it's not really a clear pattern in terms of the size of region and the number of priorities. Next one, please. Then here are basically the results for the dependent variables. So these are the industries which are selected by the region in blue, and those that are not selected in gray. Again, there is not really a clear pattern here, so we try to place all of the selections on this matrix of industrial relatedness and skill complexity, and we can see that the prioritized industries are really all over this. So there are industries that are selected as priorities that are related and complex, but also that are related and not complex, that are complex but not related, and even that are neither complex nor related. So regions tend to prioritize some even industries that are not really either related or complex. So the next one is basically then the main results of the regression analysis for this. I think you can click into the animation. So first of all, what we find is that there is a positive and significant effect of both relatedness and complexity on the likelihood that an activity is being chosen as a priority. So this is in line with the expectation that we had. Effect is a bit stronger for relatedness, but also the standard error. So the effects are in fact not so different in their own scales between these two variables. But then once we bring in this interaction, what we see is actually the opposite of what we would expect. So the interaction term between these two is negative and significant, which means that regions tend to choose industries that are either related or complex, but not really that are both related and complex. So if a region is going into an industry that is related to what they do, then it doesn't really matter whether it's complex or not. And if it's going into a complex industry, then it doesn't really matter whether it's related or not. I'll show you that a little bit more in a second when we can look at the effect sizes. Just want to also, if you can go to the next one, take you through some of these control variables that we have, which also I think show some interesting patterns. So first of all, there is a positive and significant effect of the size of the industry, and that basically means that regions tend to prioritize large incumbent industries. So if an industry already has a lot of employment in the region, then it's more likely to be prioritized. So here it's then not so much about diversification as it is about doing more of what you're already doing. Second, the size of the region is not really related to the number of priorities that they choose. In the second model here, which is with the country fixed effects, none of these coefficients are significant. So there's not really a relationship between the size of the region and the number of priorities. The number of priorities itself is actually positive. So if a region specializes in a lot of other industries, it's also more likely to specialize in this industry, which is again, underlining this point that regions don't really operate with budgets, but rather they tend to be either regions that prioritize a lot of industries, and that makes everything more likely to be prioritized, or that prioritize few industries. So if there was some kind of real prioritization, then this should be negative, really. And then finally, we also see some evidence of policy mobility. So there is a positive and significant effect, both of an industry being a priority in a neighboring region and of it being a priority in any other region in the same country. So we do see that regions tend to prioritize the same industries as their neighbors. And we can go to the next one. So this is showing the size of these effects. First of all, on the left-hand side of your screen here is the effects of relatedness and complexity on the likelihood that something is chosen as a priority. So if you look around across the scale of relatedness, basically the industries that are the least related, there is about a 15% chance that it is selected as a priority, whereas for the most related ones, there's about a 40% chance. So the chance actually more than doubles as you go across this scale. The same is true for complexity. So at the lowest level of the scale, the least complex industries, there's about a 15% chance. At the highest end, about a 30% chance that an industry is selected. So we do see quite a clear effect that the more related and the more complex an industry is, the more likely it is to be selected. But then once we look at the interaction plots, basically what we see is this really clear substitution effect of this. So at the lowest level of complexity, there is a positive coefficient on relatedness. But as you move up, then that goes into zero territory. So if you're above around 40 on this complexity scale, so a bit more than the midpoint of it, then the error of the relatedness bar really crosses the zero line. So basically, for the most complex industries, it doesn't matter at all whether an industry is related or not to what the region currently does. And the same is true for the bottom bar here for across the relatedness scale. So again, once you pass the midpoint on this variable above around 75, then it doesn't really matter whether the industry is complex or not. As long as it's very related to what they do, then regions will prioritize highly related industries. So then we can move on to the conclusions. And basically, what we find here, we confirm the first hypothesis that relatedness is an important driver of prioritizations. And the second one, that complexity is an important driver, but we do not confirm the third one. So relatedness is not more important when the industry is more complex. It's actually quite the opposite. In addition to those two findings, we do find also that regions tend to prioritize incumbent industries, and they tend to prioritize the same industries as their neighbors do. So overall, is this consistent with the ideals of smart specialization and the policy recommendations of the literature that seeks to advise smart specialization? Well, partly yes and partly no, but I think overall there are a lot of things here that reflect that the ideals of smart specialization are not really carried over into practice. So when regions tend to prioritize incumbent industries more than industries that they don't have but would like to diversify into, when industries tend to prioritize the same industries as their neighbors, they're not really acting in accordance with this idea that smart specialization should be a diversification policy, that it should be not a one-size-fits-all policy. And especially when they are choosing either related or complex industries, I mean, it's in line with the literature that they should do that, but then the interaction should also be something that is part of the priority. So it seems that regions are not really behaving in line with what they are recommended to do in this literature. So that was basically that. Look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Great, Rune, thank you very much for that presentation. A lot of really interesting issues that are emerge from that analysis. We have now maybe half an hour or so for questions or discussion. So please feel free to raise your blue hand or to indicate in the chat whether you've got a comment or a question. Perhaps I can get the ball rolling, Rune, with the first question, and it really picks up from where you left off. We're now coming into a new phase of a program design and approval as far as structural funds are concerned. Is the problem, as you see it, the problem with smart specialization literature, the theory, in the sense that it doesn't accommodate reality, or is the problem with the regions that they are misinterpreting, misunderstanding what is expected in terms of smart specialization, and in other words, they're not realizing the potential that the smart specialization theory implies?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if the problem is with the reality, then of course the theory also needs to adapt to that, I think. So I think in that sense, the problem is necessarily in either way with the theory. If it's not something that can be really implemented well by the regions, then we have a problem, really. So I think a lot of policymakers are finding smart specialization difficult to work with, and I think one of my frustrations in working with this over a number of years is that the literature and the discussion in theory doesn't really take into account that policies are the outcome of political processes. So they tend to live in an ideal world where there isn't really any politics involved. But of course, that is not how you make any policy. So it's always a political process where there are a lot of different interests. And I think if you have that as a baseline, then it's really difficult to imagine that regions would always choose to behave in this kind of more technocratic way in how they do this. So I think a lot of the ideals of smart specialization are nice, but are kind of difficult to translate into practice.
Okay, thank you very much, Rune. There are some interesting questions that I think follow on from that, but we have a blue hand from Pedro Marquez. Could I ask you that when you're speaking, you could start by introducing yourself? Thank you very much. Pedro.
Hi, hello. Thank you very much, John. You can hear me, right? Is it?
It's quite quiet.
Okay. I don't know.
That's a bit better.
Okay. So I'm going to try and speak louder then. I don't really know what I could do. Okay. Thank you very much, Rune, for your presentation. It's very interesting. There's a couple of, there's 3 questions actually I would like to ask, or maybe more comments. One is, based on my own experience of smart specialization, one of the problems, especially for less developed regions, is that they don't necessarily have a set of firms that could really engage in high-end innovation activities. And part of the issue here is whether or not you can convince large firms who may or may not be present in your region to participate in a sort of policy-led innovation activity. So I was wondering if you could include in your model some sort of indicator for whether the firms also have headquarter multinationals in there. So if you, in theory, if you have access to the command and control functions of a large firm, you'd be more likely to be able to try to bring them on board into an innovation policy. The other element, which you also referred to, is the political process. Now, of course, it's hard to capture the political process, but there's one aspect also which I found in my own research, is that several European countries, even countries that are otherwise decentralized, have very centralized innovation policy. This is the case, for instance, for Spain. Innovation policy is is designed at the national level, and so it often tends to have a very sectoral cue to it. So I was wondering if you could also include a measure of the actual levels of decentralization in these regions, and whether that would bring some sort of, I don't know how that might change your model. And the third question, which I know is not an easy one, but of course you're here, you're looking at strategies, but the real, often the point where policies often fail is actually in implementation. That's where and you do have a lot of regions that developed a decent smart specialization strategy because the Commission forced them to, but then when it comes to implementation, they just went back to, business as usual. So I was wondering if you have any plans for in the future to try to capture that dimension. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, tough questions, I think. So we, for the first one, I mean, the large companies, I guess, yeah, it's an interesting idea. I'm not sure how we would do it, I guess, because, of course, I guess all regions have some kind of large companies, or many regions at least have some kind of large companies, and then it's really about the numbers of large companies and how do you define what is a large company, etc. So I think it's possible to do that with the data that we have, but it's really how do you define it, essentially, I think. For the second one, decentralization, well, I think we've tried to look into some of the variables related to regions. So one that we have toyed around with a little bit is the quality of government in the region, where we really started to see, trying to look at whether regions that have high quality governments are actually better able to do this than others. We didn't really find very much evidence for that. I think the decentralization is also, I guess, could be applied for the same reasons. So it's certainly something that we can look into. I think I agree that a lot of these policies are at the national level, and that you can start then to look into how do regions then mobilize towards the European programs versus national programs, national innovation policies. So probably they need here to look at two masters. I think, of course, the idea of smart specialization is that it should coordinate both the regional and the national levels of government. For the implementation, I think it's probably not something that's within what we can do here, but for sure that's a big problem. We are starting now, as you know, this project where we will follow smart specialization in a bunch of regions, and in Norway we will try to follow through to implementation the policy development in Norwegian regions at least, but that would probably be using quite different methods from this.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Other questions, comments? Don't have any. Yes, one blue hand from Marat Shashkinov.
Good afternoon. I'm a PhD student from Glasgow University. I have a question regarding the third hypothesis, which mentioned that it was rejected because relatedness is not an important factor for choosing complex industries. Could you explain more what is the reason behind why relatedness is not an important factor? Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, my takeaway from this is basically that if a lot of regions are trying to develop the same complex industries, whether they are related to them or not, then that to me looks kind of like this idea that there are some fashionable industries that all regions want to develop. So it kind of goes against the idea that smart specialization is a place-based policy, because complexity is not really a place-based phenomenon. It is the same for an industry, it seems, across, at least in the way that we measure it, across all regions. So it does seem to go in kind of the opposite way, that regions tends to, there are some fashionable industries that regions tend to prioritize whether or not they have any competence in doing that. The other way, basically this relatedness idea, is basically saying that regions look at industries that they could diversify into, and then they try to do that regardless of whether that is something that's really attractive to them or not. But it's a diversification opportunity, and they don't necessarily then evaluate whether it's a good or a bad opportunity for diversification.
Okay, thanks very much for that question, Manat. Other questions or comments?
Maybe I can ask something.
Liliana, go ahead.
It seems that from what you were saying in the beginning, especially about the fact that some bigger industries can kind of take over that process of specialization. And I am just thinking that can lead to eventually to some sort of lock-in within the region, because those are constantly the actors that are being, that are leading the discussions. So I just wondered if you had some thoughts about that, if there's any other research that you thought that could influence on that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really a crucial issue. That the idea of smart specialization is that it should generate variety in the economy, that it should prioritize new industries that the region doesn't already have. But then I think when you start doing this in practice, when you start having, for instance, an entrepreneurial discovery process, the idea there is that you should bring in kind of new thinkers. But of course, it's how do you identify those who are new thinkers? And I guess in a lot of regions, the entrepreneurial discovery process will involve some of the larger industries and larger firms in the region anyway, because those are the ones that you think about when you want to have a process with stakeholders. And so I think incumbent industries are likely to be heavily involved in most smart specialization processes in practice, and are then able actually to influence a little bit what is chosen as a priority. And this is kind of when you start factoring in political dimensions, and this is the real problem, is who speaks for the industries that are not there at the moment. And I think we don't really have a solution to that. And I think we do need to look a bit more at how political factors also lead to lock-in in regions.
Okay, thanks, Liliana. Any other questions, comments?
May I make a comment?
Nigel, go ahead.
Firstly, I'd like to thank Rune for the excellent presentation, and I think it ought to be on the agenda of most political parties in Britain, because this kind of information needs to be fed into the political system at a high level. Having said that, my question is about unpredictable factors. If we look back, say, 50 years, both in Norway and Scotland, no doubt industries were being prioritised for future development, and then suddenly North Sea oil was discovered, which changed the economies of both countries in a way that couldn't have been foreseen. Equally, in different parts of Europe, in different NUTS regions, sometimes and completely unpredictably, an entrepreneur will arise and be very successful with a new industry that no one has thought of. I know it's impossible to put these things into a formula, but they happen sufficiently frequently for us to need to be able to take account of them. Is there any way we can do that? Is there any way we can predict the unpredictable?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, I mean, I think it's absolutely right that we do need to say that this is not kind of the answer, or that regions can only diversify into related activities. For sure, this is about probabilities, right? And it's not that it's impossible to go into something which is unrelated to what you do already. So So I think that's really an important qualification to what we've said. How we would go about modeling it or including it in our studies, I'm not really sure. I mean, I think I guess the underlying thing is that yes, it's unpredictable, and that makes it really not suitable to this type of method, at least. Maybe difficult in general to model.
Thanks very much, Nigel and Rune. We've got a comment on the chat from Nuriyavan. Would you like to ask that question? Put those questions directly to Rune?
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
Rune, thank you for your presentations. It was, I think I learned a lot, but I am just curious about your level of analysis. Actually, you are using two-digit sectoral level in your analysis, but do you think this level is good enough for measuring relatedness and complexity, or is it better to use 4-digit industrial level sectoral data in order to analyze the relatedness or complexity? Because I want to use also in my research this relatedness and complexity issues in Turkey, here in Ankara, but we thought with our friends its 2-digit level is maybe not enough for resolution. What do you think about? Could you comment on that, please? Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, I can. So yeah, the 2-digit is relatively crude. So we have also, when we look at industry data in Norway, where we've mostly done this, we for sure also use the 4-digit level because so that is usually how we calculate relatedness between industries, and I think that's also going back to the original Franken et al. Paper on related variety is a key issue that they look at 2-digit and 5-digit variety, and to distinguish between related and unrelated variety. The reason that we use 2-digit here is basically that's what we have data on. So what the Joint Research Center does is classify all the strategies into what 2-digit industries they prioritize, and they don't really go below that. I think also so when we provide recommendations for smart specialization, we usually do it at the 4-digit level, and I think that's the right level for identifying relatedness between industries, but I think it's usually not the level that is being used in the actual strategies, because it tends to become too detailed for the policymakers. So I see that a lot of the policymakers here find 4-digit industries hard to work with. They need in some way to merge these into larger categories and to group them in some way, not necessarily in the 2-digit way, but at least to see some kind of patterns across the 4-digit industries. So it's not really a clear answer, but I think looking at the actual strategies, it would be very difficult to identify priorities at the 4-digit level.
Okay, yeah, so I was wondering something similar, looking at some old industrial regions which have diversified quite significantly, but within very, very, very similar fields. I'm thinking of some sort of specialist steel technologies, for example, or specialist mining technologies that have then in turn led to other opportunities. I was wondering though, in terms of trying to connect this with some of the debates that are going on in Europe. One of the issues that have been debated extensively in EU institutions and also with the OECD is the growing gap between so-called frontier regions or clubs and others, not just lagging regions, but those intermediate regions. and that as the gap is widening progressively rather than narrowing. And I just interested the degree to which the regions in going back to your quadrants, that it's the frontier regions that are performing best, if you like, in terms of diversification, and applying smart specialization most effectively, or to what extent there are some examples from other types of regions that are charting new development paths very much in line with smart specialization. And just thinking of, trying to connect what you've been saying to what we know is going on the ground.
Yeah. So I mean, this is something that it relates a little bit to my answer to Pedro's question, because it's something that we tried a little bit to look at. So we tried to interact a bit these things with the development level of the region and also the quality of government in the region, to basically see, because smart specialization is such a difficult policy to grasp for policymakers. So we thought maybe you need a certain capacity to actually implement it well, and that requires a good government, and it requires being maybe a developed region. And if that is the case, that only the most developed regions can really do this, then it would exacerbate the gaps. That was the idea. In the end, we didn't really find a clear pattern there. So it seems that it's maybe difficult for everyone in a way to implement this. So at least in that sense, it might not be making matters worse. Then I think it's a really heterogeneous output in terms of individual regions. So I think it's a lot about have individual policymakers in those regions been able to engage with it. In some regions they have, and in some they don't. I don't really have a lot of good examples, unfortunately, for that. But I think it is a bit more of a complex picture than just that it's the stronger regions that are able to do it and the weakers that are not.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, there's lots of interesting issues there that will be good to tease out. Okay, we're coming up to 1 o'clock. Any further questions or comments that people have? Feel free just to put your hand up physically if that would be helpful, or use the blue hand or the chat function. Yes, Carlos.
Hi, thank you for the very interesting and clear presentation. You may have covered this, but I don't recall in your variables. Did you include the kind of economic strength or of the industries as an explanatory factors in the sense that you would expect the industries that are specialized in the logic or the rational approach would be to focus on those where you have a clear sort of economic advantage to begin with? Was this one of your variables? I don't recall. I do recall you had employment of specific industries, and the other point was about the neighboring regions. You would also, I suppose, you could assume that having a specialization in an industry that's also being specialized in a neighboring region can have a clear logic and can be smart, in line with a kind of cluster type policy approach. So it's not necessarily always negative, but I suppose this is potentially factored in your analysis when you're including sort of neighboring regions in other countries, other areas, not necessarily the adjacent or contiguous region. So yeah, just I suppose a couple of observations and questions about the rationale for picking an industry, and whether the pre-existing strength features in your explanatory model, and also this other point about neighboring regions and the kind of double-edged impact of proximity.
Yeah, good questions. We have, I mean, not really the economic, not a kind of value-added measure of the industry itself. So we have, as you say, the employment size of the industry, and then we have the GDP of the region, but not really of the industry. I'm not sure. I mean, what kind of data we would be able to use on that for all of these regions, but certainly something that we might try to look into. But I'm not sure we'd have good enough data on value added at the industry level for all of the regions. In terms of the policy mobility, yes, I agree. I mean, it's of course, there can be some kind of natural resource reasons, for instance, that neighboring regions would specialize in the same industries, or something about the conditions that they have that would make it good for all of them, basically, to specialize in the same industry. So it's not necessarily only about the policy transfer, but we think, though, that when we control away basically the relatedness of the industry to the region itself, and it still matters whether simply in itself that your neighbor does it, then I think there at least some aspect of that is just imitation from neighbors.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for that question, Carlos. Any final question? No. Okay, well, I think we're bang on 1 o'clock now. So can we draw the seminar to a close? Rune, that was a very thought-provoking presentation, as you'll have heard from the questions and comments. I think we'll follow your further work with close interest. I think you've got some publications that I think we could circulate to, or the links to participants who'd like to read up further on this, and we'll also make available the PowerPoint as well as the recording. Thank you again, Rune. Could I also take this opportunity to say that our next webinar in this series will be taking place on Wednesday, November the 11th, when we'll have a presentation by Diana Valero Lopez from the University of Stirling, who will be speaking about rural development and geographies of discontent. And we'll have further webinars in the course of the autumn, which will be looking at different aspects of regional policy and regional development. Please do use the same contact email if you'd like to register for any of those webinars. And if you'd like to keep up to date on future events. And we hope to see you again. So thank you again, Rune. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. Have a good day and take care. Thank you very much and goodbye.